So now that we've gone over the settings windows, what it looks like when it updates, and a general overview of the main menu here, it's time to start looking at our hosting and creation of new campaigns as well as joining campaigns. So that the hosting and the creation will be the initial focus of this particular video, and we'll do a join campaign in another video specific to a player join so that they can see that whole process. So this video is specifically for DMs. So if you don't plan on becoming a DM within Fantasy Grounds, you feel free to skip this one, and the next video will be appropriate for players. Okay. Okay. So this is what you will see initially under your host campaign if you've never ever selected or created a campaign or loaded a particular campaign. By default, nothing will be selected. What you see here in the middle would be a list of your existing campaigns, and the new button allows you to, or takes you to the menu that allows you to create a new campaign. Down on the lower half of the window, you will see Lobby. Now, Lobby is specific to the cloud functionality that Unity has added to be able to handle communications between clients and DMs. And we'll get to that in a moment. But unless you actually select to join a campaign or select the cloud functionality, you generally don't get a connection in that lobby field. Once you've started a campaign, if you've decided to go with the cloud option, then you will get connected to the lobby because that's how your system tells the Fantasy Grounds cloud servers that this is the name of the campaign, this is who, whether it's public and private, stuff like that. The internal and external IPs, they are the IP addresses associated with both your system, be it a laptop, tablet, desktop. In fact, I don't know if tablets work, but it's possible that they will by the time this video comes out. And the external IP would be the IP address you would give to your players in order to get connected to your Fantasy Grounds system. And we'll get to that in a moment. And on the right side of that lower screen are the IPv6 variants to the IP addresses. If you're not familiar with IPv6, I highly recommend that you watch a couple of videos on YouTube. It is something that will be coming down the road, and it is also new to Unity. I do not believe the previous generation of Fantasy Grounds was able to speak on the IPv6 channels. So with that in mind, let's go ahead and talk about what's listed in the select campaign selection there. So the 5e sample campaign, that is the default campaign that comes with Fantasy Grounds. And there is that is a perfect campaign for running through a quick test with Fantasy Grounds and showing the automation that Fantasy Grounds has and things along those lines. And you can connect with one other player if you're using the demo version, and you can connect with a number of players if you're using the standard or ultimate editions, as long as they're not using the demo edition, unless you're using the ultimate server side of it, and then you'd be able to handle all demo users. But generally, the sample campaign is really just there to show you the features of Fantasy Grounds and allow you to understand how it works as both a player and a DM. The testing one, that was just something that I was using to get used to the Unity version during the beta series. And I still periodically use it while I try to get familiar with a specific feature or specific function of Fantasy Grounds without screwing up any other campaign that I have. Now, I currently don't have any other campaign, but I do plan on creating one for this particular series. So to do so, I click on the new button here. And you can see that there are a couple of new fields here. So I will be calling this the Lost Mines of Phandelver, as that will be the campaign that I plan on running through the tutorial with. I'm going to choose 5e, but as you can see, there are a large number of rule sets that are here. The 2e and 2e, 3.5, and 4e are SRD only rules to those, as I currently don't own any DLC for those. Same with Cypher, Fate, Numenera, and the rest that are listed there. I don't own any rule sets for any of those, so all of those are specific to the SRD packages that come with Fantasy Grounds. 5th edition is where I've actually started to purchase modules and DLCs for. Now, granted, I've been doing this for 2 years, so I have managed to build up a little bit of a collection there. But generally, when you purchase DLC, or be it from the Steam Market or be it from the Smiteworks Fantasy Grounds web server, or store rather, then as you select a rule set, more and more features will potentially show up under the extensions area. You shouldn't get confused about the fact that you're not seeing anything specific to a given module. Sometimes a module might not include a particular extension or theme or decal associated with that particular module, and you'll understand why once we get further along in the interface here. So I'm going to just set a test password, and I'm going to make this a LAN connection, and here are the extensions that 5th edition offers. And if I select, for example, Pathfinder, you'll notice that several of those things went away, although I don't understand why these decals still remain, because they're not really associated with D&D, or with Pathfinder rather. But regardless, it's just a background image, so I don't see any reason why they wouldn't be usable underneath those platforms. So maybe that's why. Whoops, this goes away. So yeah, don't change the rule set when you're getting everything set up. All right. As for these extensions, this one here, FR is I believe the French version of that. I think I'm not entirely certain on that. But the language fonts are for the various languages that you would have associated with the 5th edition rule set. So in the case of Fantasy Grounds, for example, you have dwarves, elves, drow, several races that speak Undercommon, including the drow, things like that. And those represent fonts associated with those particular languages. And we'll get into that once we get into the chat windows on the main interface and all of that. But they're highly useful. They convey a lot of the role-playing functionality into the game. As if a character speaks Dwarven, they can type in Dwarven inside of the chat box, and then only characters who speak or understand the Dwarven language will be able to read what that particular character has actually said. Anyone else who can't will see the character sets that represent the Dwarven language and not be able to understand what was actually written out. So for our demonstration here, I'm going to select this decal here. But I'm also going to include some additional backgrounds so that as I get in there, I can show you some additional functionality. Let's go with Sword Coast. And do I have Mordekai's? Oops, I don't want to. I want Volo's. There's Anthers. And I must not have bought Mordekai's yet. Or it didn't give a decal. Either way. Alright, and I'm going to choose this particular theme. And we'll get to that. Actually, no, I need to show you the default theme for this for now. So I'm going to choose no theme in this case, so that you can see what the default theme for Fantasy Grounds actually looks like. And we will kick everything off here. I'm going to pause the video while Fantasy Grounds itself loads, and then we will come back to show you what's there. Okay? I forgot to mention a couple of things, so just before we get into an actual fully loaded copy of Fantasy Grounds here, I'm going to go over a couple more things. You'll notice that I gave the name Lost Mines of Phandelver, or the Lost Mines of Phandelver. That's because I'm trying to convey the description of what it is that we're going to be going through, and I plan on using that module for the demonstration of this tutorial. But you really want to convey to yourself what you are going to be putting the players through, be it an epic, a saga, a one-shot campaign, whether you're doing a league game or anything along those lines. So it's strictly descriptive, but it helps you find the campaign later, and the name of that campaign will become the name of the folder that gets created that contains all of the data associated with your campaign. And that folder again is available under the data set and campaign subfolder underneath that link there. The password is what your players are going to use to actually connect to your campaign, and the password is required regardless whether you're doing a LAN or a cloud level campaign. Having a blank password means you're going to get a ton of people connecting and disconnecting from your system, and it gets really irritating when that happens. I don't know if you can actually start a campaign now without a password or not. GM name is an alternative way for players to connect to your system. So at some level, there is a bit of tracking going on within Fantasy Grounds that if you type in Erevan DM, in this case, and I happen to have the server connected and everything set up and connectable externally, you would be able to connect to my game. Generally, though, you would give those, and that name can be given to the players, but generally you would give the players the external IP address just to make things a little bit easier. I believe primarily where that comes into play is when you're dealing with the cloud aspect of it, and we'll get to that in a moment. The other field here in this screen here is the port. So 1802 is the default port that is used by Fantasy Grounds. If you were a DM, you will have to be able to open the firewall ports on any firewall you control between yourself and your players for them to be able to connect to your server. You can make use of UPnP routers to be able to handle some of that. You could do some port forwarding to be able to do it, or you can set up an actual full firewall rule to allow traffic to enter your network. But you're going to have some level of experience to be able to do that. And this has caused other players problems, which is why Unity has introduced a new method, and that is the cloud feature. And you can set it up so that SmiteWorks servers or Fantasy Grounds specific servers handle the intermediary connection between you and your players and the players and you. So you would select a server type of cloud in this case, public or private, doesn't matter. If you want a public game that anybody can join, they obviously have to be able to know what the credentials are to be able to join. But the listing there is specifically private versus public. So I honestly don't know if they are hiding names now for private. Before they weren't. That may actually still be the case, or it might just have a symbol indicating that it is a private server. Excuse me, I seem to have a frog in my throat. Public servers is obviously just a public listing, and you'll see that if you look in the next video when we go through the join campaign process. That's where it comes into play. In any event, if you do decide to use the cloud option, you don't need to open up the firewall port anymore. So you won't need to worry about what this particular port is, and you won't need to manage firewalls or routers to be able to allow players to connect it. And that is because when you stand up your campaign, you're communicating with a cloud server that is owned and operated by SmiteWorks, and your players search for you within that list of games that is presented to the players as they load up their version of Fantasy Grounds or their copy of Fantasy Grounds. And that eliminates a lot of the headaches and a lot of pain that other players were having, specifically when a particular DM is dealing with an ISP that doesn't allow that kind of traffic to come inbound. So this is going to solve a number of issues for that particular Dungeon Master, and hopefully make things a lot easier for players. Once that is ready to go, you can then click the Start Campaign, and it will create the folder, initialize all the data that is required by Fantasy Grounds to allow you to be able to configure and record the campaign, stuff like that. And I don't mean through a video. There's a chat history that is maintained as the campaign goes, as long as all your players and yourself continue to use that chat history. You can actually go back and replay a game if you want to, but it's a lot of reading. And when you do, it'll come up with the Fantasy Grounds interface. So I will now actually go through the process of spinning up Fantasy Grounds or starting this campaign rather, and we will return once everything is actually up and running, and allow you to see what the main Fantasy Grounds interface looks like. Just to give you a bit of an idea, this is what your loading screen is going to look like before you actually get into the actual campaign. So once you hit start, this can take some time to actually go through the process of loading everything up, and during that entire time, this screen will be displayed. Once it's ready to load, you'll see it switch over into an interface that we should see in a moment. All right, so now that the campaign is up and running, this is the default theme. This is what Fantasy Grounds provides, and it's sort of like a faux leather kind of material that kind of reminds me of the covers of the class specific modules from 2nd edition Advanced Dungeons and Dragons back in the day. But before I get too far into this, I'm actually going to switch out the theme to something that helps me present a little bit better on YouTube. I'm not entirely certain if this is going to be too dark or not. And then I'll go through the process of explaining exactly what it is that we're looking at here, and what things should be adjusted, what things need to be adjusted, and stuff like that. So I will return once I have started the Fantasy Grounds up with the theme that I like. So this particular theme is the Wizards theme. I'm actually going to give you a showing of each of the individual themes. It doesn't take overly long to load, so I figured I'll just run through them. And then I'll continue the process with the theme that I plan on choosing. And this one's a very nice theme. It's very crisp. It's clean. Reminds me more of the pen and paper aspect of things, and so on and so forth. But there is a minor issue with it. Some of the flarings that you see on the graphics here, the dragon stuff head here that you have, when you open up additional windows, those can become a problem if you're looking at a screen real estate contested system, because as a DM, you're going to have a lot of windows open. And it can be problematic if you happen to have this option here, or this example of this thing here, because you can't click on anything that's underneath this particular graphic. And I don't know if it extends out on this particular side of it, but it has been a bit of a problem. But I digress, so I will load up the next theme. So once again, this is the Wizards theme, and I will return with the additional themes. All right, so this particular theme is the Dungeon theme, and I do like this one to a certain degree. There's a lot less in the way of flaring on the windows. The skull that closes windows is actually where the X used to be. But the background, in my opinion, is going to be too dark for YouTube, so I'm not going to be using this, and it's going to be very difficult to see what's down here, although it is showing up in a white font. This, by the way, is a quick command bar that I'll explain a little bit later. This actually looks pretty good. It's got a little bit of the faux leather theme mixed in with it for the windows and whatnot. And as a dungeon theme, this I think is actually quite appropriate. So I will be back with the next one. Now this particular theme is the brown theme, simple brown. Excuse me. And in this case, it's primarily due to the shading on the actual assets and icons that you see there. It's similar to my favorite one. I prefer the gray version of this particular one, so this is going to be very similar to the one that I do intend to use. And it looks very crisp. It's clean. There's not too much in the way of fairing or anything on many of the windows, except for this little pop-up here, but that's easy to deal with. So it doesn't really create too much of an impact on a system that might have some screen real estate challenges. And overall, I like this theme. I like the next theme as well, and that will be the one that I will be using. So what I will do is I will skip the gray theme for the next one and show you the wood one, and then we'll come back with that particular one. But this is a very good, crisp, clean overall theme to go with as well. Okay, so this is the wood theme, and it actually looks great. I don't think I've actually looked at this one before, but I do like the borders. I like the graphical symbolism that's on the side of the chat window. The background's a bit dark for what I plan on presenting on YouTube, so it might be a little bit hard to see, although you're not really going to be looking at the background once all the windows are in place. But the borders could be a bit of an issue. But I do like this scroll bar. I really like that. I don't know. I may use this going forward, but we'll see. And the buttons over here also look pretty crisp and clean, as does the quick bar down here, as well as the modifier tab and all that jazz. It just makes it feel like you're sitting at a table. And that is perfect for the immersing yourself in this kind of a game. All right, so I will be back with the last one that I will be using for the rest of the demonstration, and then we'll go from there. And finally, this is the simple theme, simple gray theme. And this will be the one that I use for the remaining duration of the video series. And the only reason is just simply because I can cram everything together a little bit closer, fit a little bit more on a single screen. I generally work with a 2 monitor wide DM screen and a 1 monitor wide player screen, so I need to be able to show both points of view during this series. So, and as a result, I need to be able to fit as much onto the screen to be able to make it compatible with YouTube. So on that note, this is the theme that I'll be using forward. Now, the reason why I made such a big deal of this is because you as the DM choose the theme the players are also going to be seeing. So this theme here will be the theme your players in turn see on the client side of things. And as a result, players don't have as much flexibility when it comes to what their interface looks like outside of the layout that they have chosen going forward. And even in that case, there are some instances where windows won't necessarily stay where they are saved, where they were last placed, things like that. So what I'm going to do next is cover the points of view from the player perspective, and then I'm going to circle back to fleshing out the rest of the campaign setup. Making some suggested recommendations. And the reason for that is that some of the things that you want to tweak and adjust within the settings of this particular campaign setup screen are going to be very relevant to how the player sees information. So it makes a lot of sense to run through and have a player connected at the same time for the purposes of that demonstration, so that you can see both particular sides of the screen here. To see how it affects the player and show what the player sees, stuff like that. So I will come back to that after I've dealt with the player connection screens and whatnot, and we'll go from there. Okay.